And again, I'll go ahead and manage the waiting room, but I do want to introduce John Lucas, Deputy Director for Financial Aid here at Virginia Tech. I'm sure he's got a lot of information to go through. We will we're going to go ahead and let him present and kind of wait till he's through the presentation. And then if you've got a question, you're welcome to put it in the chat, raise a hand, unmute and ask. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him. So welcome, John.
All right. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Glad to be here tonight talking a little bit about financial aid and what we do and what people can expect through this process. So it's quite a lot of information. And really, I do that to make sure we have plenty of time at the end for you to ask the questions that are on your mind. And I'm happy to answer those questions for you. And that will be helpful for everyone to learn through the questions that we get from people about this crazy world of financial aid and how it all works. So let me get to share my presentation. So, all right, so financial aid. All right, so what is financial aid?
Just so you know, we're having a hard time hearing you. It's your audio is cutting in and out. I don't know if that's just me or anyone else is hearing that.
Is anyone else having a problem with the audio?
Yes, it's going
yes,
in
yes,
too.
Yes. It's sort of cutting in and out.
Well, all right, hold on 1 minute. Let me take a quick second and let me reconfigure something real fast. And we'll see if we can make a difference. And then change my location slightly as well. So hold on 1 second. All right. Hopefully this will be better. And let me get the presentation back up and we'll get through that.
Thank you. It's better so far.
Okay, good. Thank you. That is good to know. And get my share. I unplugged from my other situation here. Right. I'll have to go with, forgive the mode of this. This should be better. So financial aid, what is financial aid? Essentially, financial aid is monetary assistance provided to help students pay for educational expenses. As we all know, college can be very expensive. And so financial aid is a big part of this experience for a lot of students. Essentially, financial aid pays for things like tuition and fees, housing and food and books and course materials and other expenses that students have to pay for college. And generally, financial aid is made up of a couple different types of support. There are scholarships and grants. There are student loans, parent loans, and also work study, which is where students work and earn some funds to help pay their ongoing expenses. So that's kind of generally what financial aid is. And then what are the sources of financial aid? This is sort of where all the money that is out there is coming from. And as you can see, there are a lot of different sources of financial aid. So one of the big sources of financial aid is the federal government. They provide a lot of money into the financial aid world in terms of Pell Grants and student loans. The state governments and all state governments across the country are offering aid to support students in going to college. The colleges and universities themselves are providing some funding as well. And there are also private sources of funds civic organizations, scholarship foundations, places of worship, and even employers are providing aid for their employers or sometimes their employers' children to go to school. So all those sources together are kind of being combined into the support that a student gets to attend the institution. So looking at the different types of financial aid, we do have gift aid, which essentially is aid that does not need to be repaid. That's primarily scholarships and grants. And then what's called self-help aid, which is made up of loans or employment, also known as work study. So those are kind of the two types of aid that's out there. Of course, we are all very excited about the gift aid and less excited about the self-help aid. But again, as there are many sources of financial aid, there are also many types of financial aid, and they all serve a purpose and all combine to help students afford their college education. So a couple pieces in terms of gift aid, talking again about scholarships in particular, money that does not need to be repaid, so that's really important. Scholarships are awarded on merit or skill or unique criteria. So many people are familiar with athletic scholarships. That's one example of merit or skill, but also scholarships that go to students with really strong grades. Those are at academic merit. There are students who get scholarships because they play a certain musical instrument. They're getting scholarships based on that skill, and all things like that. So scholarships generally based on merit, skill, or unique criteria. And then also grants, again, gift aid, but grants also are funds that do not need to be repaid. And the grants are awarded primarily on financial need. So again, there's a distinction between scholarships and grants. Both are funds that do not need to be repaid. So they're highly valued, but they are different in their own way. So one of the big questions then becomes, well, how do I find scholarships? That sounds like a thing that I want. How do I find them? Well, there were a number of different ways to look for scholarships. There are some search tools on the internet. We recommend these two among many. Fastweb.com or collegeboard.org are places to search for scholarships that are outside of the financial aid process. Definitely check within your own community. Again, parents, employers, places of worship, civic groups, things like that. And definitely another good source of scholarship information is your local high school. Your school counselors, your teachers, someone at your high school is going to be responsible for collecting and distributing information about local scholarships. And that's an important place to find these. So check your high school's website as well. They likely have information shared there. And check the college website. So as you're looking at this early in the recruiting process, you're looking at probably a handful of schools that you're interested in. The hard part is you do have to look at each school individually and see what they're offering for scholarships, because they're all going to be a little different from each other. That's a theme you'll hear me say a few times in this presentation. While you're looking at more than one school, you do have to kind of keep in mind how they're different and then also how they're alike. So in terms of Virginia Tech specifically, though, we can talk about that a little bit more in more detail. There is an online scholarship application that is open. It's called Scholarship Central. The website is available in the slide, vt.academicworks.com. You can also find the website very easily. But that is an online scholarship application that you can fill out. And it's important to recognize the deadline that I have highlighted in the presentation. That's January 22nd. So that feels like a long time from now, but in the course of your busy senior year of high school, in the course of the recruitment process, looking at lots of different colleges and universities, that time will go quickly. So do make sure that you're getting your application in early. It's also important that you do the FAFSA as well, the free application for federal student aid. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes, but that's going to be important. It's also important to recognize that the application for admission needs to be completed. And part of what is going to be based on reviewing students for scholarship eligibility is how you answer the essay questions and how that looks. And it's important to remember as well that Virginia Tech is a test optional school. And to that end, test scores are not considered as part of the scholarship process. You may decide to submit your test scores for admission if you choose to do so, but they will not be part of the scholarship process. So I do want to make sure that people are aware of that. And then one important thing at the bottom of the slide You don't have to wait for an admissions decision before you apply for scholarships at Scholarship Central or do the FAFSA. So please make sure you're doing all of those all at the same time. Do not wait to hear about your admissions set decision before you move forward on those other things, because it's possible that you may find yourself doing things too late. So you can go ahead and do everything all at the same time. Another thing about scholarships at Virginia Tech is that there are some scholarships that are managed by the colleges and academic departments specifically. So some examples: College of Engineering, the Davenport and Pratt scholarships, the Corps of Cadets has an Emerging Leaders Scholarship, and the Honors College has some of their own recruitment scholarships. These are outside of the Scholarship Central process I just talked about. So do make sure that if you are considering Virginia Tech and you have an academic interest already in mind, please make sure you're checking those college websites as well, specifically to see if they have a separate scholarship application or process, because you want to put your name in the hat for all things that are possible, because every little bit does make a difference. You will continue to apply in Scholarship Central every academic year, not just your incoming freshman year, but every year. You would also do the FAFSA every year. And if you have a 4-year scholarship commitment, you want to make sure that you are going to meet the renewal criteria and the application depth every year to be considered for that going forward. This is just a screenshot of the Scholarship Central website, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. But you would sign in and do the application, answer the questions, and that's a great way to sort of have one way to qualify for a whole bunch of opportunities for scholarship support. So the other piece of the gift aid equation from scholarships was also grants. So again, remember, grants are basically money that does not need to be repaid. It's generally going to be based on financial need. There are several federal grants. So the Pell Grant is one that most people are familiar with. It's been around for quite a long time now, so it's a. There are other federal grants as well as state grants, and in Virginia, there's the Virginia Guaranteed Assistance Program, or VGAP for short. Also the Commonwealth grants, and these are state grants, state-funded grants that go to students to help them pay for their education. And then if you go to a private school, there is also a Virginia Tuition Assistance Grant, which does have a separate application. But if you end up going to a private school, there is still some state money that can help support you in your educational journey. So that's really important. And then, of course, every college and university has some grant money as well. So there's going to be institutional grants from all the schools. So definitely make sure that you understand how to apply for those grants at every school. Make sure you understand what are the deadlines for applying for things. And as I mentioned before, as you are looking at more than one school, please make sure that you're keeping track of all the different deadlines, all the different ways to apply for things, because you want to make sure that you're not leaving anything behind. So the other category we talked about was self-help aid, and the first part of self-help aid are loans. Most people are aware that student loans are a pretty big part of the college experience for a lot of people. So again, loans are money, but it does need to be repaid after a student leaves school. Repayment usually begins when a student graduates. Most repayment begins once a student stops attending, whether they've graduated or not. But for most of our students, that means when they've graduated, left here, gotten a job, and they get to repay that loan over time. It's important to be smart. We will always award the maximum amount of federal loans a student is eligible for, but that does not mean you have to accept the full amount. We always caution people to only accept what you need. That will help you keep your overall loan borrowing down. And even though people would prefer to have scholarships and grants, of course, loans are an important part of paying for school. And it's really important to view your loans as an investment in your future. We all know through different articles and research that have been done over the years, how much extra money a person will earn over their career with a college degree versus not having. So if you think about the impact a college degree will have on your future earnings, then even if you have to borrow money to get it, it's certainly a worthy investment in the overall scheme of things. So don't view loans as a bad thing. Loans are not good or bad. They're simply a tool to use to pay for school. And there may be some years where you don't borrow much or any loans, and other years where you may have to borrow. But overall, they're a good tool to have to help you make your payments. So a couple quick notes on student loans directly. Student loans come from the federal government through the FAFSA process. federal direct loans is what they're called. There are two types of loans. There's a subsidized loan. That's a need-based loan where the student is not responsible for the interest that accrues in the loan while they're enrolled, at least half time. There's also an unsubsidized loan, which is not need-based, and that means interest is accruing on the loan while the student is in school. And there are also, regardless of what type of loan a student has, when they are in repayment, there are various types of repayment options that the government has to make repayment easier on people, which is nice. And there are also private student loans. These are student loans that don't come from the government, but they come from private lenders, mostly banks, but credit unions. There can be other lending institutions that get into the student loan game. These are credit-based applications, so the student would most likely need a cosigner in order to qualify, whereas for the federal loan, there's no credit check and the student is offered the loan automatically because the government is backing the loan themselves. Interest rates, loan fees, repayment plans, they will vary based on the private student loan lender. So it's important if you do go down that road to make sure you're checking and comparing those items, see what is the best option for you. We do have a tool on our website. It's called Fast Choice. It's in the loan section of the financial aid office website. And it does have historical data based on the loans that students have received. It's a pretty unbiased way to check and compare lenders against each other to see which ones seem to meet your needs the best. So it's a really good tool. I'm glad that we offer it. And I think it helps a lot of people make good decisions about how they want to use a private lender if they do go that route. Another version of loans is actually for parents. And so there is a federal direct Parent Plus loan. So that's a loan from the government through the FAFSA process. In this case, the loan's for the parent and not the student. 3 easy steps to apply. The student does the FAFSA, and the parent then completes the Plus loan application at the studentaid.gov website. And then there's a promissory note that the parent would complete at the end of the process. And it's pretty simple, straightforward in that respect. It is a credit-based loan, so there is a credit check. And if the parent does not pass the credit check, then we can offer the student some additional loan money. Or the parent can check and get a cosigner, an endorser, they call it in that arena, if they choose to do so. The good news about a Plus loan is that the payment can be deferred while the student is enrolled. So much like a student loan, a parent would not have to repay the loan if they choose that option while the student is enrolled, and that gives the parent a little bit of extra maneuverability in terms of their budget. There are also private parent loans, much like there are private student loans. Same basic premise, you're applying through a private lender, banks, credit unions, student lending companies. It's a credit-based application, so it's possible that a parent might require a cosigner. Again, interest rates, fees, and repayment plans vary, so do your research. And again, that Fast Choice tool I mentioned before for student loans is also available for parent loans. And so if you want to go down the road of looking at a private lender for a parent loan, that's a good way to do that research, make those comparisons, and find the private loan lender that is best for you. The last piece of self-help aid is employment. And through the FAFSA process, it's possible for students to earn federal work study. And that is a way for students to get a job on campus. And there are also some off-campus opportunities. Student earns a paycheck during the academic year, which they can use for their ongoing expenses. It doesn't help them pay their tuition and fees in terms of each semester, but it does allow them to have money that they can use for ongoing expenses. Do they need to buy toothpaste? Do they need to buy laundry detergent? Do they need to, go off and get some food? Things like that, that can be used for those opportunities. About 8 to 10 hours a week is generally what a student would work. The FAFSA is required because it is a need-based program. But one of the other benefits to work study is students are learning a lot by working on campus. They're learning a lot from their employers. They're learning different skills. They're learning how to operate in a professional environment. A lot of the supervisors will serve as references for students when they do apply to graduate school or they want to apply for jobs when they graduate. And also parents, I will tell you that people like us in our office, we're also looking out for our students. So it's nice to have some adults in their lives that are keeping an eye on them, making sure that they're doing okay. So work study is a really good program. Now, work study does not mean, if you don't have it, that a student cannot work on campus. There are non-work study jobs, regular student employment positions. So if a student does want to work on campus and they don't have work study, they can still have the work experience on campus. It's just a different way of being paid. So I mentioned before that one of the sources of aid are the colleges and universities themselves. So they will provide financial aid. based on both merit and financial need. The offered aid that you get from a college or university, it may be gift aid, it may be self-help aid, or likely a combination, depending on all the information that comes from the FAFSA. Most schools will use the FAFSA for state and federal aid, and some private schools primarily, but some public schools, some of them will use also the CSS profile that is not used here at Virginia Tech. We do like to make sure people are aware of these different applications and how they work. So depending on the schools that you're applying to, they may be a school that does require the student and the parent to do CSS profile through the College Board. That's another way that they get information to decide how to award their institutional aid to the students that are applying. The deadlines and the application requirements will vary by institution. So it is important, as I mentioned before, and I'll probably say it a few more times before the meeting is over, to make sure you're keeping track of all the deadlines, all the application processes, all the things that are required for all the different schools that you're looking at to make sure that you do not miss anything. The good news is once you do settle on the one school that you want to go to, it becomes much easier to follow all those things. So now we talked a little bit about what financial aid is and sort of what are the different sources and types of financial aid. We got to talk a little bit about how to get it. How do you get started? This is a really important part of this whole process. So the FAFSA is the number one piece of information in this whole process. And again, the FAFSA does stand for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Of course, the government loves their acronyms, but this one was very important and chosen specifically because they wanted to make sure that the word free was the first word in the application name, because they wanted to make sure that people knew that applying for financial aid through the government is a free application. There's no fee, not to pay anything for it. So that is why the acronym is a little complicated, but it is with a reason and a purpose. So the FAFSA is a standard federal form that collects demographic and financial information about the student and the family. When you do the FAFSA, you will be able to list all the schools on it that you're considering, and all those schools will get the application that you have filled out individually. So you don't have to do the application 10 times, you do it one time. You put 10 schools on the FAFSA. All those schools will get your FAFSA information when it's processed by the Department of Education. It is available online or in paper form, but the number of people that do an online application is probably about 96% of all FAFSAs filed, maybe even a little bit higher now. So most people are doing it online. The online form is a little bit better. It's faster and easier than the paper form. Your information is safe and secure. They work really hard to make sure that all your information is protected. And the online form does allow you to do direct data exchange from the IRS into the FAFSA. So all the income questions that are based on tax information can be imported directly into the FAFSA. Very easy, very accurate. You don't have to worry about a thing. The FAFSA is available in English and Spanish, and will also be available in up to 11 languages total once the new FAFSA is rolled out. The government's really trying to make sure that language is not a barrier to people being able to fill out the form. The last bullet point on this slide is the website, studentaid.gov. That's the website that you will go to complete the FAFSA, and many, many other things. I mentioned it once before already in terms of applying for a PLUS loan. That one website that's maintained by the Department of Education is really important for all things related to financial aid, whether it's you're applying for financial aid for the first time doing the FAFSA, or a student who has graduated, has their degree, and is repaying their student loans, who may need to go to that website to track their payments, track information about their loans in the past and things like that. So that website is very important to get familiar with. This is just a screenshot of the homepage for the website. As you can see on top, there's a FAFSA link. There's a link for loans and grants for information. There's a link for repayment. Again, as I mentioned, students who are in repayment would also be coming here to do things. So this is an important website to become familiar with. So what is some important information about the FAFSA? Normally, the FAFSA would be available October 1st. That has been the case since 2016. But with all the new FAFSA changes that are happening for the upcoming 24-25 academic year, there is going to be a delay for this 1 year. So the FAFSA will be available sometime in December. We are assuming mid to late December. And then next year, it will return to its October 1st opening date for the future. The FAFSA does use what they call prior year information, meaning the information On the FAFSA, we'll be asking about your 2022 tax information. The good news is for most of us, we've already done our taxes for that year. Therefore, the information is available and easy for people to put into the form. Most colleges have a FAFSA filing deadline or a priority filing date. At Virginia Tech, that date is March 1st, 2024, but this is just another example to be prepared and understand all the different dates that the schools you're considering may have. You want to make sure that you are meeting the earliest dates so you can make sure that you are having your FAFSA in on time. Well, and then so the next question becomes, what do you need to do or have available with you to fill out the FAFSA? The most important thing to start with is the FSA ID. FSA is an acronym for Federal Student Aid. FSA is a department within the Department of Education that does do all this work for us. They do create the FAFSA. They do all the online stuff. They do a lot of databases and things that we work with as professionals. But the FSA ID, one for the students, and then also for the parents, they have their own FSA ID. This is how you log into the FAFSA and how you sign the FAFSA, or how you would sign information regarding student loans as well. So that ID is really important. If you do not already have an FSA ID, I would recommend going out and creating one in the next couple of days. That way you have it ready. So when the FAFSA does open in December, you don't have to create the ID, you already have one. That will be important to have. Parents, if you already have an FSA ID because you filled out your own FAFSA in the past or FAFSA for other children, you do not need to make a new one. It's the same one. But likely your student will need one for the first time. In order to do an FSA ID and the FAFSA, you need to know your social security number. That's for the student and the parents, so make sure you have that available. Students who have an alien registration number would need that as well. You need your information from your tax returns. If you do the FAFSA and IRS data exchange, that will prevent you from having to look at your tax returns very much, but it's good to have them handy in case you do need to refer to them. And of course, you may need W-2s as well, especially for students who maybe worked but did not follow the tax return. They will need to look at their W-2s to determine how much income they earn in that 2022 year. The FAFSA will ask some investment-related questions. So if you have investments, CDs, things like that, stocks, bonds, you may need to have that information, money markets handy. Records of untaxed income, that can be important. And of course, we mentioned before the list of colleges, because you will be putting on the FAFSA the schools that you're interested in going to, because you want them to get your FAFSA data. So the FAFSA will be able to take, in this new updated FAFSA, we'll be able to take up to 20 different colleges and universities you can put on the FAFSA. The limit used to be 6 in the old days when there was a paper FAFSA, then it got up to be 10 schools with the original online FAFSA. Now it's being expanded out to 20. So you can consider a lot of different schools. And again, they really want you to make sure that you're getting all the best information that you can get by having the schools get your data. A couple important FAFSA tips to remember, and some of this is brand new for the upcoming school year. Every contributor to the FAFSA, meaning the student and the parents, or in the cases of students who are married, their spouse, every contributor has to have their own FSA ID, and contributors will also have to consent to having their tax data to be on the FAFSA and for schools to receive that information. So it's going to be, those are some changes for this year. It's new to everyone, but that's an important part of the whole process, is to make sure that people are consenting to have their data on the FAFSA and to be used by the schools in awarding financial aid. So students will fill out the FAFSA. They will invite the contributors, in this example, likely their parents, to fill out their section of the FAFSA separately. So that's also a new process this year. And again, contributors, last bullet is mentioning what I mentioned earlier, that they will be consenting for their tax information to be transferred to the IRS, from the IRS to the FAFSA, and to have schools and state agencies use that information to determine eligibility. So again, this is another screenshot from the FAFSA process, where the student would have listed the contributors, parents or spouses, and how to invite them, and then follow-up screenshot to show for the student what they can expect now that they've done this important piece. This is an example what the student would see, to see who the contributors are in this case, and then to know that the invitation was sent to the parents. So the parents, important to track this information all the way through to make sure all the pieces are being completed, because the FAFSA cannot be complete until the student and the parents have filled out their information, have provided the consent, and have signed the FAFSA with that FSA ID. So now that that's happened, that all seemed very easy on the slides, right? But now that we've done the hard part of doing the FAFSA, what happens next? Now that the FAFSA has been submitted, it really becomes about two different important numbers we're going to talk about. And again, the government loves their acronyms. So we have SAI, Student Aid Index, and COA, Cost of Attendance. And I'll explain to you what those are. So the Student Aid Index, this is the outcome of completing the FAFSA. All the financial information, all the demographic information is all put through the federal financial aid formula. And the part that comes out of that is the Student Aid Index. So it's an index to basically get a sense of a student's and a family's financial situation, and how much financial need does a student have to pay for going to school. So every institution that you put on the FAFSA is going to get this SAI, and it's going to be the same at every school. So again, after submitting the form, you're going to see this type of output. And one of the important things that it says is your form will be processed in 1 to 3 days. So it does take a little bit of time once it's submitted to go through all the processing that happens at the Department of Education. The student will also get what's called the FAFSA submission summary. Here's all the information that you put on the FAFSA. So it's always good to double check that to make sure there are no errors on it. And of course, the schools will get a version of your FAFSA as well. We import that into our system, and that's how we can then determine how best we can help a student with all of the different financial aid sources. The other important piece of information mentioned was COA, or cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is an estimate on the cost it will be to attend the school for the academic year based on full-time enrollment. This includes what they call direct costs. So the things that you get a bill for from our school, for instance, the tuition, the fees, if you're living on campus, the housing, and the food plan. These are things that are charged on the bill. But the cost of attendance, the cost for a student to go to school, includes more than just those direct costs. There are also indirect costs, such as transportation, books and supplies and course materials, equipment, other expenses for the student that are not part of the bill. I mentioned before, they got to buy toothpaste and laundry detergent and all those important things when they're going to school. Got to buy those extra long sheets for the residence hall rooms, right? These are all indirect costs, but these are costs that students and families incur to send a student to school. So it's part of the overall financial aid process. So the direct costs plus the indirect costs are the cost of attendance. The amount of financial aid a student receives in the year cannot exceed the cost of attendance. And each institution does create their own cost of attendance. So the figure will vary from school to school. And for instance, like at Virginia Tech, we have a cost of attendance for in-state students and also a cost of attendance for out-of-state students, because their tuition costs are higher. So we have a different cost of attendance for out-of-state students. So even at one school, there are different versions of this number, but it is a way that you can compare different schools, the costs, not just the cost of the bill that you will get, but also the overall costs. And it's also a way for schools to determine a student's costs versus their student aid index versus the amounts of financial aid that are available. So I mentioned financial need a couple different times. The subsidized student loan is a need-based loan. Work study is need-based. There are certain grants and scholarships that are need-based. So what does that really mean? Well, the cost of attendance, what is the cost to go to that school, minus the student's aid index, SAI, equals a financial need. So a very simple example. To keep the math easy, we made it round numbers, but the cost of attendance is $37,000, and the student's student aid index from the FAFSA is $7,000. That means that the student basically can contribute $7,000 to the overall cost, which means they have, in this example, $30,000 in remaining financial needs. The student has financial need, and when comparing this student to a student with student aid index is larger, say 10,000, then this student in this example has more financial need than the other student, or potentially less need compared to someone else who has a lower student aid index. So those are just basically some financial aid foundational pieces that all schools are doing, that we're all required to create a cost of attendance by the government if we're going to give out financial aid, and we're all doing the same type of work. So again, financial needs. So financial aid offices are attempting to meet a portion of a student's remaining financial need, generally a combination of gift aid and self-help aid. How much the remaining need will be met by the school, it just depends. Every school is different. The types of funding available to the school is different. The number of students that are attending is different. So it's not going to be exactly the same at every school, but every school is trying to do their best to meet as much of the financial need as they can to have the resources to be able to pay the bill and attend their institution. So, but as you're looking at different schools, you will see some differences. The cost of every school is different. So the beginning part of the whole equation, the cost of attendance, is different. A small private school could be more expensive, and a state school, but it's out of state, could be more expensive. Those types of things will make a difference. So I want to go over a couple quick helpful hints for this whole process before we get to your questions. Just a moment. It's important to know and meet all the deadlines. Again, I mentioned it a number of different times. Make sure you know the earliest deadlines for all the schools you're considering. That way you will not miss or be late on anything. Be aware of how the financial aid office will communicate with you. Most schools will communicate by email, just as we do here at Tech. So it's important to keep up with email messages, important to keep up with the students' admissions portal and their Virginia Tech portal, for instance, to make sure that you know what's required. If there is a request for information, respond quickly to it. It's really good to get things done early in the process to make sure that everything can be in place when financial aid is awarded to students. Keep your FSA ID handy for both the student and the parent. Have it available. Make sure you know what it is. Make sure that you know what your password is. All those things will be important. This is really a big one, this next one. When you're filling out the FAFSA and even any information, whether it's a private loan, student loan application, whatever it may be, please make sure that you're putting in the correct social security numbers. Please make sure correct dates of birth. Don't confuse parent and student data. That really can muck up the process, cause some confusion, and cause some delays. It's really easy mistake to make. I see it every year. I see it all the time. So do make sure that you're keeping that information handy and make sure that you check it before you submit it. If you can, use the IRS data exchange. That's what I mentioned before about transferring data from the IRS to the FAFSA. That means it's quick, means it's accurate, means it's safe, and it means you don't have to worry about trying to find the right numbers on the IRS tax forms, trying to find the right place to put it on the FAFSA. It will be there automatically and automatically be correct. Make sure that you complete your admissions application and make sure you're doing the in-state portion of it, so you can make sure you're being charged in-state tuition. Remember to file the FAFSA every year, not just this 1 year, but also every year after that, in order to make sure that you're getting access to financial aid and making sure that you're able to keep eligibility for aid that you've received so far. And again, know the requirements for continued eligibility. Is there a GPA requirement for a scholarship? You have to maintain a certain GPA. You have to do a scholarship application or a FAFSA by a certain date. Do you have to be enrolled full-time versus being enrolled half-time? Things like that. These are important things to be aware of. One last thing to get to before the questions, but it is very important. Sometimes there are special or unusual circumstances. And these are actually terms used by the Department of Education to describe what can happen when filling out a FAFSA. If you're filling out the FAFSA, it's asking very distinct and discrete questions. That doesn't always mean that's real life. So for instance, if the FAFSA is asking for 2022 income information and a parent is currently unemployed, then that FAFSA is not going to accurately reflect your current financial information. And students will wonder, well, what do I do when that happens? How do I handle that? Well, the first thing is you fill the FAFSA out correctly. Don't change any information. That information is accurate for that 2022 income-based year. But the schools will help you with those different situations, whether it's a loss of income because of a divorce or a separation, whether it's loss of income for being unemployed. Unfortunately, there are some cases where a parent is now deceased and that income that was available on the tax return is not available anymore currently. The schools have a process where they can help you with that. We can fill out some forms. We can make some changes to your FAFSA on your behalf, and the school will apply what's called professional judgment flag, where we're saying the increment on the FAFSA was correctly inputted, but this current situation is different, and we're going to allow the FAFSA to reprocess with new information, which can help make you eligible for more financial aid potentially than you would have been otherwise. There are also unusual circumstances, which has to do with a student's dependency status. So when a student's filling out the FAFSA, in order to determine whether a student requires parent information, it's going to ask a bunch of dependency related questions. Much like the earlier example, the student may not be able to answer yes to one of those dependency questions, which makes them dependent with parent information, except for maybe there's some special circumstances where they cannot provide it. Again, we would provide information to a student. We would help them through the process and be able to process their application with our help as an independent student if required. So those are called special or unusual circumstances. The bottom line is fill out the FAFSA application correctly, despite the current situation, and then work with the different schools that you're applying to get the new or current information properly fixed up for you so you can get the financial aid that you're eligible for. Okay. So I know that's a ton of information. I'm sorry that it took a little bit of time to go through it, but it's really important to have this sort of baseline foundational knowledge of the process because you'll be going through it every year. And it can be very confusing at first. So getting a lot of those terms out there, getting a lot of the pieces of information out there, how things work is really important. But the good news is we're now at the part where we can answer questions for you. So I'm gonna leave the slide up that has our contact information. So if it is about financial aid at Virginia Tech, you can email us, you can call us, you can use a chatbot on our website, but also use the resources available at studentaid.gov, also at Chev's website, because that will also help you get information that you need. But we are available to help. We're available to answer your questions. It can be confusing at times. Don't let that get you down. We were happy to help. We've been helping students through this process for a long time, and we're pretty good at it. So trust us to help you navigate it. It's not as hard as it seems initially, and hopefully we can answer some questions for you now to help show you that it's definitely not as bad as you think. So what kind of questions are out there? You can put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask it in real time, I'm happy to do that for you. It looks like Steve is doing me a big favor and answering some questions in the chat. Thank you, Steve.
Absolutely.
So continue to use the chat as well, because we can also put that. Anyone have a question? All right,
Sounds like we're losing John. John, you're you're a little quiet. So COA versus SAI, just to kind of give you a heads up, COA is the cost of attendance. So that's an estimation by the university to determine what it would cost for your student to go to school that year. And so it's an estimation that's developed by the financial aid office based on a number of factors: tuition, fees, transportation, and other items, to kind of give you an idea of what it's going to cost for your student to go to school. The SAI, the Student Aid Index, that is what's going to be the new EFC, which I know we don't want to mix terms too much, but the SAI is really, it's a determination on how much, it's really a determination of how much the parent could possibly assist with the paying of a student's education at school. So a lot of factors go into the new SAI as over EFC, and so that's what it is. It's the cost of attendance is what the expectation is that the student will have to pay, and the SAI is kind of an expectation or an estimation of what the parent will be able to contribute. Of course.
Thank you, Steve. So we'll give people a moment to think of their question, add it to the chat, or of course, you can ask it in person if you'd like to do that as well. Aha. Steve, you want to do this one as well? Oh, you're on mute.
See, now I'm muted. Sorry. An applicant who is 18 years old is aged out of foster care. How does financial aid work? Ooh, that's a good question. I know John will have a better answer than I will, but I will give it my best pass on this. A student who is in foster care, a lot of it depends on the institution. I know that in the state of Virginia, students that have been in foster care and age out of that, they're actually automatically eligible for in-state rates. as well as dependency clarification. Basically, they're treated as an independent student. And so that gives them the ability for higher need, obviously, and gives them, I don't want to say maximum consideration for aid, but it does help them out significantly when it comes to financial aid.
Right. One of the dependency questions I mentioned before about that is used to determine whether or not a student would be independent on the FAFSA, in other words, not having any parent income, would be if they've been in foster care or a ward of the court or status like that, because that basically means that there is no parent in the picture. It doesn't mean the student's not getting supported by different groups, or whether it's the county, the state, or the people in the family. But in terms of the FAFSA itself, which is very, very strictly considered about a student and the biological or adopted parents, that student would be independent. So the FAFSA form itself would guide the student through that and determine that in that moment. The next question was the difference between the FAFSA, and I assume that it means the CSS profile, which I think is what the question was being asked. I mentioned that earlier in the presentation. The FAFSA is the federal financial aid application. The CSS profile is a supplementary application that's used mostly by private schools, but there are some public universities that will use it. And it's basically asking additional questions to the FAFSA. And if a school is using the profile, it means they're going to use the FAFSA information in order to award any federal or state financial aid. But for the institutional aid that the school gives out, they want to consider the additional information provided in the profile, as well as the FAFSA information, to determine how much they want to award a student and what scholarships are going to be available. So we don't use it here. I've not worked at a school that has used the profile, so I don't have any experience working with it directly. But it's if the school is requiring it, you'll need to fill it out in order to be considered for their institutional financial aid. The following up question is a great one. Thank you, Erica, for asking. Is filling out the FAFSA mandatory? It's not required or mandatory to fill out the FAFSA. You can apply for admission, get accepted, and pay the bill without going through the FAFSA process. Personally, my advice has always been to students and parents, since the FAFSA is free, there's no reason not to fill it out. Just find out what you're eligible for, to find out what you can receive. And even if the only thing that you are offered would be a student loan, and you don't want to use it, you can decline it, and it's okay. But the reason why I think it's important to fill it out, one, you want to find out what you are eligible to receive, and two, you may not want to use a student loan or a parent loan initially, but sometimes things will change as the bill comes out, as we get closer to the beginning of a term and payment is due. And the example I always give is a personal one, because it really kind of tells a story. But middle of July, one year, our air conditioning broke at our house, and we had a very large unplanned expense in our household budget of replacing the air conditioning for the home, which, because it was the middle of July, we could not wait. We had to do it right away because it was really, really hot. So so that money that may have been earmarked to paying for college had to go to a home expense, then maybe I would have been happy for that moment to take a student loan or a parent loan, pay for school. Because I had done the FAFSA already, I'd already been through all those steps. It didn't have to then start from scratch. So that's just, one reason to think about filling it out, but it doesn't require you to do anything. If you do fill it out and get awarded the aid, you're not required to accept it. You don't have to have a loan if you don't want it. But no, you do not have to do it if you don't want to, for sure. It's totally up to you.
Just
a great question.
That is a great question. Also, on the last question, there was a little bit of a follow-up for all the deadlines the same or different. So the FAFSA, there really is no deadline for filling out the FAFSA. However, let me be very clear in this, saying that for a lot of schools, they have what's called a priority deadline, and that priority deadline is what is used for maximum eligibility consideration for aid at that institution. For Virginia Tech, it is March 1st. And so we really want all of you to get that FAFSA in by March 1. That is to give you the maximum eligibility for aid. Now, the CSS, again, Virginia Tech doesn't use the CSS, and it varies by school if they have a requirement for what deadline they want to put on that. But filling out the FAFSA, you can fill out the FAFSA anytime. It is not required to be filled out. It can fill it out if you find yourself that you need loans later on, you can fill it out. But for maximum eligibility, you have to have it filled out by that March 1 deadline. So March 1, 2024 would be the deadline for the 2024-2025 aid year.
It's also likely that at a school that does use the CSS profile, that the date for that would be the same as the date for their FAFSA priority filing date, most likely. So I bet you'd find that to be the case.
Yep.
We have a new question in the chat, so thank you for providing that. Can two members of the family get FAFSA at the same time? And that is definitely true. So there are some families where maybe more than one child going to school at the same time. So each child does the FAFSA, even though the parents are the same on the FAFSA. The children's information is distinct and separate. Also, there are times where you may have two parents going to school at the same time, and they're both getting financial aid through the FAFSA process. Or, of course, a student and a parent going to school at the same time, each doing the FAFSA themselves, becoming eligible for financial aid, deciding to use aid or not, borrow student loans or not. All those different things are in place. So yes, it's not like one FAFSA per family or any kind of limit like that. It's basically every student, be it your child, their siblings, or yourself as a parent, every student who wants to complete a FAFSA will do so. And each student will be awarded financial aid based on all the different pieces we talked about already. So thank you for.
Yeah. No, please finish.
I was going to say that in the chat, wanted to confirm there are two different dates that we mentioned. So we want to make sure we're being very clear about it. As Steve already mentioned, how important it is to get things in by the deadline. For Virginia Tech and us alone, the Scholarship Central application deadline is January 22nd, 2024. And the FAFSA priority filing deadline is March 1st, 2024.
One thing to note, you do not, so while we say that the FAFSA is required, it's not required to fill out, it's not a chicken or egg. So you can fill out, you could go out, if your student has applied for admittance to Virginia Tech right now, the scholarship application is open, and you can go fill it out right now without having the FAFSA filled out. That just kind of knocks that off the checklist. Once the FAFSA opens, which we're expecting, we're hopeful early December, but we're kind of expecting mid to late December for that to open. Once that opens up, then you can fill out the FAFSA and check that off. So it's not that you have to wait to fill out the scholarship application to get to do the FAFSA or vice versa. You can do them separate of each other, just get them both done.
We have someone who's raised their hand in the Zoom. So if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question, that would be great.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the SAI you mentioned, student aid information from FAFSA. So how is that different from expected family contribution, EFC, on the SAR report?
You should work in our office because you have quite a command of all those different.
He's got the acronyms down.
That's right. So up until this year, this current academic year, the result of the FAFSA is the EFC, or expected family contribution. For the new FAFSA for the 2024-2025 academic year, the EFC has been changed in name and also in how it's calculated and all that, but just it's now student aid index. So you can think of them as being roughly the same thing. And the EFC was always an index anyway. Now SAI will call it really what it is, which is an index. But if you've done a FAFSA before and are familiar with the EFC and how it turns out, the SAI will work similarly. And it will be something that you're familiar with because of that. You also mentioned the SAR or the SAR or student aid report. And that is also, I mentioned that earlier in the presentation, that is the same thing that will be called the FAFSA submission summary, but it's the same product in that when you complete the FAFSA, the student gets an email summary of all the questions that they answered. So one, you know that it was submitted correct, properly and has been received. It's also a good chance to double check the FAFSA, make sure that you didn't make any errors on it. For instance, sometimes people will make a typo And instead of putting in $50,000 of income, they put in $500,000 of income. Well, the FAFSA doesn't know that it's right or wrong. It only knows what you typed into it. And so the school gets it and thinks that's the income and does all of its stuff to it. So it's always a good double check to make sure when the FAFSA is submitted, to make sure that you go through those answers to the questions, make sure they're accurate. And if there is any kind of error, then you are able to correct the FAFSA. So don't worry if you spot anything that's wrong. It's just know that you want to make those changes so you have an accurate application. There is another question in the chat. When will you know how much you qualify for once you apply and complete the FAFSA? This is a hard part of the process. So I'm glad you asked that question. When you complete the FAFSA, when the student submits the FAFSA in its process, you will know what your student aid index number is. The output will also tell you if you qualify for a Pell Grant, what that amount would look like. It would also tell you about the student loans you qualify for. For a new student who is a freshman, I can tell you that the total amount of student loans that they can receive is $5,500. That's a federal annual limit. But the output will tell you that. The part that you don't yet know is what the school will offer you. So the reason why we have a March 1st priority filing date for the FAFSA is because we start to award financial aid around that time. And so once the school has presented to you their financial aid package or financial aid award or a financial aid offer, schools will call it something along those lines. Then you will know what the school is offering you. You know what the cost of attendance is at the school, so you can look at those two things together. And then before you commit to going to a school for next year, you can look at the financial aid offers at all the different schools, look at their cost of attendance, look at the net cost, if you've heard that term before. What is the cost of attendance minus any gift aid? And then considering any loans if you choose to, what would it cost you basically out of pocket? That's how you can compare the relative cost of each school as part of your decision making. You can compare, of course, academic reputations. You can compare, of course, locations, and compare student activities, and all the different things that a student's going to look at, as a family will look at, to determine what is the right place for me to go to school. Of course, we know cost will be a big part of that. So you will have, depending on when the school does their financial aid offer, you may have some time in between submitting the FAFSA and getting that information. And there may even be a little bit of time in between getting all the offers from all the schools, because they will do them on their own timeline. Now, I don't mean their own timeline in terms of when they feel like it. I just mean they have their own process, and they can tell you when they will do that. But then you can know, we've heard from all the schools, we have all the financial information, we've been on all the tours, we've considered all the academic pieces of information. Then you make that final big decision, which is not easy. And Steve has a son in college, I have a daughter in college. We've been through that process ourselves, and it's not easy, but it is quite exciting at the same time. So you're in for quite a ride.
Absolutely. So the next question, do you recommend that parents apply or to the FAFSA, or do we? So here's a good rule of thumb. The person who's requesting financial aid, the person who the financial aid is for, should be the person filling out the FAFSA. That's probably the easiest way to think of it. And so if you are a student, obviously, if you're a student and you are a dependent student, meaning you live with mom and dad, your parents, and you know they're going to be helping with that. They'll want their own FSA ID, but you'll want your own as well as the person filling out the FAFSA. So good rule of thumb is the person who is the financial aid is for is the person who should fill out the FAFSA.
There is another question about sharing the slide deck. And that's back to you.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Happy to share the slide deck. Kim, I can send it to you for sure. And happy for you to get it out to people who would like it. That's not a problem. So I will be happy to send it to you, and then you'll have it to disseminate as required. So no problem there.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got a folder for all of these Wednesday sessions that have the recordings, and if there is a slide deck to go along with it, I make a folder and put them both in there. So definitely, once John gets them to me, I'll add them to that file along with the recording from tonight. So you will have both. And earlier in the evening, I put the link to that folder You typically get it in an email. I will get the link again right now, and I'll throw it back in the chat for anybody that joined late.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim. That's wonderful. Happy to stay online another minute or two if people do have a question. I hope that it wasn't too much information at one time, but I do know that this is a lot of information, but I'm happy that we can go over these important topics. I'm happy that we could answer the questions that people had. I hope it was helpful. And please remember, as you go through this whole process, whether it's coming to Virginia Tech or going to another school, please remember that every school has people on campus who want to help answer your questions, help you navigate the process, help you figure out how everything works. Just have to ask for help. And that's why Steve and I are here. That's why we do what we do is to make this process as easy as possible. And I know it seems initially like, boy, it's a lot of information, but it's not so bad. And again, we're here to help you through it. So please feel free to reach out to us at any point in the process that you need the help, and we're going to be there for you.
It is a lot. I always compare it back when I applied to college, and literally it was a piece of paper front and back that you hand wrote. You folded that piece of paper, you put it in an envelope, and you were done with your application. I have 2 children that have been through college, and I feel like it just continually gets more complex. But through these sessions, through the speakers that we have, like John said, we really want to help you get through it. So do not hesitate to ask us questions if you need them. I will say that, just to give you a heads up, although we send out weekly emails, the next series of sessions, we'll be sending out an email tomorrow that has what's coming up. Next week, I will be presenting on a couple of programs in the spring that are specifically for admitted students, and an opportunity, if you haven't been on campus or you want to get back, to visit and spend an overnight on campus with current students as a host. So really an opportunity to see the student side of thing and ask all those, so what's it really like as a student here at Virginia Tech? So I'll be talking about Women's Preview Weekend, which is specifically for young women who have applied to the College of Engineering, and then the Gateway program, which is very similar in terms of an overnight, but it is for underrepresented and underserved students across the university, so not just the College of Engineering. And you have another question, so I'll let you go answer that.
Okay, great. I actually was typing an answer while you were talking to make sure we got the question answered, but we're happy to also answer it out loud. For parents who are divorced, the question was, well, do both parents fill it out, or how does that work? For parents who are divorced, the student fills out the FAFSA, as Steve was indicating, who's getting the financial aid to the student, and then which parent should be included. The rule from the government is that the parent who provides the majority of the support to that student is the parent that should be on the FAFSA. So if my wife and I are divorced, and my daughter lives with me, and I'm providing her the majority of her support, then I'm the parent on the FAFSA. My wife, ex-wife, would not be on the FAFSA. Her information would not be included. But if I was remarried, then my new spouse, their information would also be part of the FAFSA. So that part can get a little confusing for a minute, because you think, well, that other person's not the child's parents, not biologically, but that is the rule for the federal financial aid, that if parents are divorced, who provides the most support is the parent on the FAFSA. And if that parent is remarried, then that person, the new spouse, is also included. If I'm just living alone, not remarried, just my information, my daughter's information as a student, and my ex-wife would not be part of the FAFSA process. I know that's a little complex. I hope that was clear in the explanation.
And one change, and John, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here. A change for 24-25 is that it's not the parent you live with the most. It's the parent that provides the most financial support for the student. So that's a very different change for the 24-25 FAFSA. That's different from previous years, is that it's all about the financial support that is provided to the student. Parent that provides the most financial support.
Right. In the majority of cases, the parent that the student lives with is probably providing the most support. Correct. But Steve is correct that up until next year's process, the first question that was asked was, who does the student live with? That was the parent that was used. But for the new FAFSA for 24-25 academic year, the rules have changed a little bit. And as Steve said, it's all about who provides the most financial support to that student. So it's likely to be the same in many cases as it always was, but it is a different question with a different answer potentially. And it is important that you're clear about that. And as we said before, for parents that are part of this who have filled out the FAFSA in the past for other children, you know, you're going to be familiar with it, but there are going to be some differences that will be out there. So please kind of keep that in mind as you're going through it. But your experience will be helpful, trust me, because it's not so different that it will look very similar in most cases. And the changes are the result of the FAFSA Simplification Act passed by Congress. So Kim, to your point, it's supposed to be getting a little easier. They have removed a lot of questions. They're trying to make it easier for people, trying to make it more streamlined. This is the first year, so you will forgive the government any hiccups the first year out, but hopefully it will be easier going forward, and then I do think that it will be.
And you're very welcome.
We're very happy to help. I appreciate everyone taking the time to come out and spend some time with us. Like I said before, I will be happy to send Kim the slide deck and she'll post it for folks who want to refer to it. I hope that it does prove to be helpful. And please remember, if you do have questions along the way, please reach out to our office or any office at any campus that you're considering. Please don't feel like you have to go it alone, or please don't feel frustrated by anything that's confusing. The folks there will help you. We're all here to help, and we do want you to have a good experience. So please rely on us when you need to. Steve, thank you for your help.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you both
everyone.
for participating. We're pushing 7:10, which is about 10 minutes over, but there were lots of good questions. And again, it's much better to answer them. But if there are no more questions, I'm going to say thank you and let everybody have the rest of their evening. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you
a
all.
good night.